Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, helping higher education marketing leaders share knowledge about learning, strategies, and tactics that are relevant today. See what you can learn today by listening to one of our episodes.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the Higher Ed Demand Gen podcast, hosted by Concept 3D. A little bit about Concept 3D here. Concept 3D helps bring your campus to life virtually. We've served the higher education community for over a decade with our award-winning interactive maps and virtual tours. Improve your campus communications, student engagement, and recruitment with our powerful location-based virtual solutions. My name is Shiro, and I will be your host today. I'm currently the Director of Demand Gen at Concept 3D, and I'm speaking from my awesome home here in Silverthorne, Colorado. And today, I'm super excited to have Stephen Tomkiel join us today. Stephen is a higher education leader, currently the MBA director at the College of New Jersey. But before he became the MBA director, he has worked for a long time in admissions, as well as implementing and overseeing Slate CRM, which we'll talk a little bit more about later today. Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Shiro. Thanks so much for having me. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. So where are you joining us from today, and do you want to start us off with one fun fact?
Sure. So I'm calling in from my office here at the campus of the College of New Jersey, here in beautiful Ewing, New Jersey. And for a fun fact, so I am Polish-American, and I love pierogies. They're like one of my favorite foods. I love Mrs. T's pierogies. And so back in 2013, I was in college, actually, for National Pierogi Day in October. I bought like hundreds of pierogies, like 10 boxes of Mrs. T's pierogies. I'm going to cook them up for all my friends, and we were taking pictures. We had a really nice time, and I ended up sending a picture from the party to the company, and I was named Mrs. T's Pierogies Fan of the Month for October 2013, which is super exciting. They gave me coupons. They gave me like a little shout out on their page. So one of my greatest accomplishments, something I'm very proud of, on top of everything I've done for higher education, obviously.
Amazing. I need to put a nickname for you, Stephen Pierogi Tomkiel.
That's right. That's it.
I love it. I love pierogies too. That's a really good fun fact.
Nice.
Thanks for sharing that with me. Great. Well, on our initial call, we were kind of seeing what would be some good subjects to talk about today. And I think we really land on one, which is around meeting students where they are and really focusing on the low-income students. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's right. So sure. So in our conversation earlier, we were kind of talking through the fact that something that we've experienced a lot at the College of New Jersey, and I think a lot of other schools are starting to notice, is when you think of that kind of traditional college-going population, so typically students who are maybe middle or higher income, coming from really well-funded high schools, coming from families where they are not the first to go to college, they've seen the pathway, they've seen folks in their communities go on. That traditional population, quote unquote, is starting to shrink. And so what's happening is we're seeing schools, continually putting in more and more resources to kind of vie for a smaller audience. And I think really when we talk about kind of what is the future of higher education, how do we continue to make this enterprise sustainable, it's about not just looking at the students who already know they're going to college and continuing to try to draw their attention, but actually reaching out to kind of create new college students and finding students who maybe didn't think about higher education as an option for them, and really showing them the resources and support networks that they have access to that can help them get there. And that's something that I've really put a lot of time and focus on, both in my work at the College of New Jersey and in my doctoral studies. I'm a current doctoral candidate at Rowan University, and really looking specifically at the low-income population. And so that's students who are typically eligible for federal Pell Grants. And it's a really interesting population that has a lot of opportunity to benefit from higher education. Higher education has made me a better person, the topics that I've learned, the people that I've met. It's connected to social mobility. But what we see when we look at low-income students is they're kind of facing two parallel challenges. So one, at the level of available resources, the resources that we have created for these students just aren't doing as much as they used to, or at least aren't doing enough to kind of close financial and other gaps these students are facing. So we see things like Pell Grants losing their purchasing power as tuitions continue to increase. We see programs like Gear Up and Trio, these really excellent programs that will kind of build interventions for at-risk or students who aren't thinking about college and kind of get them on the right track. Those are excellent programs, but if you compare, the 1.3 rough million students who are served through programs like Gear Up, if you look at that population, about 1.3 million students, and you compare it to the population that could be eligible for those services, just in terms of things like free or reduced lunch, we're reaching less than 5% of the students who should be able to benefit from those types of resources and programs. So there's not enough funding, there's not enough service as it stands. But on the other side of the coin, we see a lack of uptake for the resources that are in place. So in 2012, for instance, there was $3.2 billion in kind of allocated federal Pell Grants, free, no strings attached grant money for students to go to college that was left kind of on the table that students did not take advantage of. Because again, when we start to think about students who really aren't envisioning college as an option for them, they may not be submitting to FAFSA, or they may be coming from communities where they're not seeing their parents or peers going on to college, really encouraging that as a pathway. They may be attending schools where their counselors just have such a high caseload, they're not able to have that high touch and make sure that students are taking the right college prep classes, thinking about scholarship opportunities. So I think really students are kind of getting tracked out of higher education before they even start to have the conversations. Is it something I want to pursue? Because they're not being connected with the right opportunities, with the right resources, requirements they need to know about to bridge those gaps and make it into the academy. And I think higher education institutions have a real responsibility to try to help bridge some of those gaps. And I think that's something that folks can do at any level, whether they're faculty, staff, administrators, and it's something that I have tried to do in my work in undergraduate admissions and specifically with the Slate CRM database tool.
Got it. Okay. I was going to say, I had a conversation just the other day with another podcast guest, and they were mentioning that, yes, a lot of money just gets left on the table just to start with. And a separate person I talked to, she is the director of admissions at a community college, a 2-year institution, and she was mentioning a point around, that 2-year institution really needs to embed themselves with the surrounding high schools more. And that's one way she's implementing and making sure that that money doesn't get left on the table. And they start earlier within a career instead of just senior year or junior year. They're really embedding themselves within that high school curriculum from freshman or sophomore year. Are there other things that you've seen that schools are doing in terms of helping to make sure that money isn't left on the table? I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, I think to your point, building those relationships is key, really having a presence in high schools. I think, it can be as simple as just helping to pay for buses to bring students to a college campus. Once they start walking around and they see the beautiful buildings and the great dining hall and all the different food options they have, even those little things can help a student start to think, okay, this is a space that really can be a place where I belong, can be a place where I grow. I think things like dual enrollment, so actually having faculty from higher education institutions teaching high school students potentially at the high school, potentially on a college campus. If you get a couple credits under a student's belt, then they kind of have some skin in the game. They have a real reason to continue to follow that pathway. And then I think pairing those kind of educational resources with informational resources as it relates to financial aid and paying for college. So if a student's enrolled in a dual enrollment class, if they're earning college credit, it makes total sense. Okay, let's take one class period, and instead of doing the lecture, let's have somebody from the financial aid office come in and talk about FAFSA. When do you fill it out? What do you need to know to make sure that you're qualifying for the highest possible loans and grants? Or in states that do merit funding, there are a lot of states where funding gets tied to things like standardized test scores or GPA. So making sure in those instances that students are educated on what they need to do. It might just be about switching one class on their high school schedule, or signing up for an earlier test date for PSAT or SAT, but making sure that students really have that roadmap laid out. So that way, they're able to really start processing earlier. Do I want to go to college? And if they make that decision, they know exactly what they need to do to get there.
Got it. Thank you. Switching gears just slightly a little bit. I know you mentioned Slate earlier, and this is part of a big project you've taken on at the College of New Jersey.
That's right.
I think you've been with Slate since day one when they first started implementation, right? And I know a lot of people here come into a system already in place, but I think there's still a lot of schools still, working on that CRM implementation. And I think it'd be really, really helpful if you could share some suggestions or tips from, what you've learned with your Slate implementation in CRM.
Sure. Yeah. So as you said, when TC&J first bought into Slate. It was our first ever CRM. I remember the year prior to admissions, we had been printing out transcripts and application materials on paper and bringing home manila envelopes to review our students. So it really was kind of a 360 in terms of the way we managed our processes. And in my mind, and kind of thinking back, I want to say this is happening in the fall of 2018 when we were first diving into this. The process kind of happened in 3 phases for me as kind of a ground level implementer. And so I think initially when we first kind of got access to our Slate instance, the first thought was kind of the copy and paste step. We know there's certain things we need to get done. We need to be able to retrieve applications from the Common App. TCNJ is a common application school. We need to have resources for our team to review applications and release decisions, and we need to be able to communicate with students. So I think things we had already been doing, but it becomes this question of how do you digitize it? So how do we make sure that the core data points that we would always highlight on the Common App, it's not just about printing a sheet and highlighting that info, it's about how do you actually build it into a student record and a student profile so it's easy to find in the database. Or if, for us, the transcript is the most important piece of application review, how do you make sure that's displaying really clean and clear for application reviewers so they know where to find it, they know how to look at it, and they know how to kind of share their thoughts on it. So step 1 is kind of that copy paste, just taking what you're doing and moving it into a new context. But I think a really essential kind of parallel step that kind of becomes a second step is then, copy and paste is fine. It's an okay place to start, but really the question that you want to be asking, or you want your team to be asking as you implement, it's not just how do we do this task we've already done in Slate, but how do we make it better? What are the opportunities to actually improve that task, both for staff members, team members, and students themselves? So for instance, again, thinking about the transcript as kind of the most important piece for application review, at least for TCNJ, we really are keyed in on what students are doing in their high school environment. Being in the CRM gave us access to these really great annotation tools where even if multiple staff members were reviewing an application, somebody could highlight a low grade from freshman year, somebody could put a little digital sticky note where they talk about, I had an email with the counselor, we got some context on this. There were really clean and kind of standardized review forms, so every staff member is kind of responding to the same prompts and providing thoughts on the same key pieces of the application. So it's taking what we're doing and just using the technology to make it more efficient, make it more standardized. I think that's a moment where really for schools that are getting into the weeds of implementation, they kind of need to find what I call the super users. So the folks who really want to dive in kind of head first into these new tools. I've always been that kind of person. I'm an early adopter. I get excited when a new game console or computer or smartwatch is coming out. I want to play with it. I want to mess around. Finding those folks who aren't afraid of technology, get excited when new things are on the horizon, and also finding the folks who aren't afraid to maybe mess up a couple times. I always joke, I'm really good, especially when I'm working in Slate, of getting things wrong 4 times in a row so I can finally get it right on attempt number 5. And so I think you got to find somebody who can kind of roll with the punches and kind of enjoys that trial and error process to build something new and better. And it's something that I do consulting work, and I work with a lot of schools, not just TCNJ, as folks are getting into Slate and talking through, again, what are those potential roadblocks? How do you learn from mistakes, and how do you build something, better and better with each iteration as you're working through the same processes and ideas, just in new lenses and in new spaces. And then the last thing I'll say in terms of kind of transitioning into Slate, once you have that groundwork laid out where you've taken your core processes, you've built them into the system, you've thought about ways to improve, then it's about bringing more specialized team members and specialized tasks into the database. And often these are folks who have a lot of ownership over their processes, so they might be intimidated or hesitant to share that work with somebody else who's just kind of bringing more of the tech lens to it and just trying to realistically ask them to do their work in a different way. That can be something that makes people uncomfortable. But I think when you have those conversations, it's about identifying tension points and really making the case, kind of being the salesman and saying, no, this tool really can help you do your job better, can help you do your job in a way that's maybe easier, and can help produce better outcomes for students. So just a couple examples. I remember working with a member of the transfer team at CCNJ who was used to having a really high level of touch with their students, and they were nervous that their students were going to get lost in the database. And I worked with them one-on-one to build specialized lists where anytime a new transfer applicant came into the system, they saw them right at the top of the query where they would pull all their different applicants, and they could look at them first, figure out what help they needed, do the interventions as needed. Similarly, we work with the EOF team, kind of circling back to low-income students. In admissions, we would work with a program called the Educational Opportunity Fund, which is empowering low-income students to pursue higher education at TCNJ. But there are some more stringent requirements for those applicants. Specifically, they have to submit tax documentation to show their family's finances. And through conversations with the EOF team on campus, we learned that a lot of students were just kind of getting stuck in the weeds or providing incorrect information or kind of exhibiting confusion in terms of what they had to submit when. And so we work with that team to take those tension points and kind of take the explanations, when you get the phone call and you're intervening and fixing a student's issue, okay, let's take that information and build it right into the application so students are seeing the solutions to problems they may be facing down the road before those problems even arise. And the last piece I'll say, this is a tiny one, anytime you can automate something, people love automation. And so I found that out pretty easy. If you can take a process and turn it into something where Slate just looks at a data point and identifies a student as a transfer or as an EOF, and from there it can automatically give them checklist items or information and communications. If you can take an actual process off of somebody's plate, chances are that's a good way to get them on their team. So that's something I talk about when I do consulting a lot as well.
That's amazing. Yeah, it sounds like getting buy-in and partially just leadership skills and selling not below but also across. Did you also have buy-in from your leadership? Like I'm not sure who you worked under during this implementation period, but were they bought into the idea and they helped support any cross leadership capabilities that you were trying to push through as well?
Yeah, that was the good news. Really, I think there's a strong understanding, both within the admissions office, enrollment management division, going all the way up to the president of the college. We knew that we were kind of behind the eight ball and that we weren't facilitating application processes through online tools. So we got a lot of support from the college in terms of the actual funding it took to, work out a contract with Slate and get the CRM up and running on our campus. And then I did get a lot of support from my direct supervisor and my director of admissions in terms of kind of reworking responsibilities. So if you are a Slate implementer, chances are it's a little bit harder to kind of be the traditional admissions kind of the road warrior. You can't be on the road traveling to high schools and catching flights, when you need to be building new tools and connecting with folks who are having issues in the database. So I got a lot of flexibility from my leadership, kind of understanding, okay, at least in the short term, this is a major project for the institution. This is a major priority. So, some of the more traditional admissions tasks might have to kind of go on the back burner. And it's all about getting you in front of the right people you're working with, making sure that folks understand that you are the expert in this area and kind of, giving me that sense of empowerment where again, I felt like I had the room to try new things, make mistakes, ask questions and work with my peers to find answers. So, yeah, that made a huge difference.
I love it. Yeah. What have I know it's been a few years now since we started this project. What have sort of some of the outcomes been so far, both positive and negative?
So
I guess.
I think, yeah. So I think really, kind of going back to my original point, something I've always been passionate about is meeting students where they are. I think that's how you take underrepresented populations like low income, like demographically underrepresented populations, Black students, Latina students, in order to get them on the pathway to higher education. If it's not something they're thinking about, you need to really streamline the process as much as possible. And Slate has enabled us to do that. So again, thinking like a population such as those who may be eligible for TCNJ's Educational Opportunity Fund, a lot of first-gen students, a lot of low-income students coming from lower-funded school districts, we were able to take a lot of those data points that could tell us, okay, based on what high school the student is from or based on their first generation status, they are likely an EOF candidate. We don't know until we get the application, but we have a good sense that they could be eligible. And we're able to use those data points to then produce personalized communication flows where they're getting email content about programs that other students aren't necessarily going to be interested in, or they're getting invites to events in their area that are really focused on the resources that we think they can take advantage of and that can benefit them. And then kind of producing like a life cycle around that idea of personalization. So we were able to start texting students. We know that students are a little bit more responsive to text messages than emails. Right. And so especially for underrepresented students who aren't thinking about college as much, getting in front of them on their phone has been huge. Building custom application portals and processes where when they log into their application, they see, okay, here's each piece I'm missing for TCNJ. I'm missing my transcript, or I'm providing financial information based on my parents' W-2 forms, and not just, oh, I'm missing this information, but here's actually a paragraph just for me that's only showing up because I'm missing this that explains exactly what I need to do to turn that red X on my checklist into a green check mark. So we've seen major improvements in terms of how we kind of guide students through the process, and ways in which, again, oftentimes that guidance is automated. They can call me, they can email me. I'm always happy to connect with a student, but they don't necessarily have to. They can get the help on their own. In terms of downsides, again, there's always something new to do. Again, we started with the basics, just getting our common applications fed into the system and getting reviews and decisions out. But it's always the question of, could we be doing more to track things like financial aid in the system? There's a lot of different systems that I think schools start to realize may have trouble talking to each other. So we used to just print transcripts out and mail it to the records and registration office. But now we have transcripts in a database. They have a different database, different software. How do we get those two to talk to each other? And how do we get those two systems to then talk to a third system that manages student enrollment? So, all of a sudden the rabbit hole can get pretty deep, and that's something that we're continuing to work through. But again, I think as long as you have kind of like-minded, motivated professionals who understand that when all these pieces come together, it benefits the institution and benefits the student, people are willing to put in the work, and it's, we all get there together one step at a time.
That's amazing. Yeah. And has those going back to the positives, have you seen the results, like in terms of numbers, getting closer to your goals that you've been trying to hit?
Sure. So I'd say, again, we're in an interesting environment where the application numbers have declined a little bit, at least over the past, 5 years, between demographic changes and COVID and other challenges. But I think the positive metric is that we have continued to make our incoming first-year class. We're continuing to hit our enrollment targets and actually bringing in classes that are larger than what they were 5 years ago. Because even if we have a smaller pool that we're able to reach out to, we're able to kind of hit them at a higher level. We're more engaged with the students. We have better tools to identify the best fit students, so we're able to work with a smaller audience and still achieve all of our core goals because we have the technology to understand who they are and connect with the right people and help them understand what we're all about.
That's amazing. That sounds like things are at least working. More for the positive.
Absolutely. Yeah. One day at a time. But yeah. So far, so good. No, I think so far we've been really pleased with what we've been able to accomplish in the database for sure.
That's amazing. I was wondering, where can our listeners connect with you? About what you're doing currently at TCNJ, or also your freelance work as well with Slate.
Yeah, absolutely. So whether folks are interested in continuing their education and pursuing something like an MBA at TCNJ, we have an excellent online hybrid program. Or if there are any folks listening who are higher education practitioners who are thinking about getting involved with Slate or other CRMs or in the first stages of that process, I certainly encourage anyone to connect with me through my LinkedIn. I'm Stephen Tomkiel, pretty easy to find online. My email for my consulting work is steven.tomkiel@gmail, so pretty easy to connect with me there. My TCNJ email is just my last name followed by my first initial, so it's tomkiels@tcnj.edu. And then I have a personal booking calendar, so steventomkiel.youcanbook.me. Anybody can grab time with me, and I'm always excited to talk with folks who are passionate about education and just learn about what's on their mind and see if there's anything we can do to work together. So yeah, encourage folks to get in touch.
Amazing, great, and we'll have that in the footnotes for the descriptions of the podcast as well for all the guests. Awesome. Again, thank you so much for all your insight and knowledge sharing. That was amazing. I think we got really tactical, which is something I don't always get to do. And so that was really, really helpful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, again, thank you so much for having me. It's great to get the chance to chat and just talk about things that these things are always in my head. So if I can get them out and have other people thinking about them, that's exciting. So thank you.
Appreciate you. Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for joining.